Dunn and Company, just over I was going to say 40 years old. No, I'm slightly older than that, but I've worked for Edgar Dunn for about 16 years. We've been around for about 40 odd years and celebrated our 40th anniversary last year. I head up the retailer payments practice, so that's serving a number of retailer clients in the omni-channel environment and working with technology companies such as ACI. I really appreciate ACI inviting me here today, and I'm very, very pleased to introduce Jackie Barwell, who's the Director of the Fraud and Risk Product Manager here at ACI. Jackie has just over 30 odd years of experience of working in the financial services and financial crime prevention area. She joined the ACI team back in 2014 when ACI acquired Retail Decisions, or RED. Prior to that, she's had a number of positions in both in the financial services sector and also the technology fraud prevention vendor sector. Jackie is a founding member of the UK's Fraud Women's Network. I've got to be careful how I say that, and that's not Jackie. That is correct, isn't it? It's just that it's not women just committing fraud. It's women in fraud prevention.
That's right. Yeah, it's a fraud network of like-minded individuals who work in the fraud prevention, detection, investigation and prosecution world.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much, Jackie. What we'd like to do today is just introduce the context, and first of all, let's talk about e-commerce. So we've seen e-commerce grow significantly over the last few years. If you take 5 years back, it was, within the European context, it was around about 280 billion, and the expectation by 2023 is going to be over 1.1 trillion worth of sales revenue. Obviously, the UK, France and Germany represent the biggest e-commerce markets within Europe. Approximately 60% of the market is represented in those three countries. Now, one thing that we've found, and we started a study at Edgar Dunn and Company about 5 years ago around click and collect, and how click and collect was starting to become an important aspect of the e-commerce world. And click and collect is really a service that is offered to consumers by merchants, and it's really the epitome of found well, 5 years ago we tried to predict how click and collect was going to evolve, and we've found in the last 5 years that it's certainly growing beyond the standard grocery supermarket and growing into other channels and working with third parties. So we've seen examples of click and collect lockers and various collection points, and even click and drive, which the French love to do, where they buy their groceries online and drive through and pick up their groceries in their car. So as we've looked at click and collect as a segment within e-commerce, it represented around about 10 million, or so 10 billion I should say, and we tried to forecast, this was 5 years ago, we tried to forecast, and we were forecasting 2018 for Europe in the region of 20 to 25 billion transactions just within click and collect. And it's interesting that in reality it's just over 27, just about 27 billion, so we were very happy with our forecast, and we've taken the bold step of trying to forecast the next 5 years, and we're expecting it to be around about 45 billion transactions. So we will see in 5 years' time whether we're close to that expectation. But growth is still double digit, although it's been very, very quick and 21% growth in the first 5 years, but in the next 5 years it's slightly slowing, but it's still double digit, so it's quite significant. We'll pick up on that growth in a minute. And as I alluded to, Click and Collect is not just about groceries. It's expanded into other sectors, fashion retail, hospitality, food and beverage, Click and Collect, and order ahead type of propositions for consumers. So it is spreading beyond the usual vertical of grocery. And so therefore what we're finding is the line between the digital physical shopping and digital online shopping is blurring and increasingly becoming blurring. And what fraudsters are doing is taking advantage of that. They are using these new channels, new ways of shopping as a means of penetrating retailers, unsuspecting retailers, to intercept transactions and commit fraudulent activity. And I think that's what's one of the important topics that we want to cover over this webinar. And the 6 areas that I'm going to ask Jackie to sort of expand on is building on the background and the context of growth, define what we mean by positive profiling, because I'm going to learn quite a lot during this webinar to understand what that means. The importance of the data lake and using third-party data sources to feed that data lake. And then we're going to discuss how the fraudsters of yesterday, maybe 5 years ago, are very, very, very changed over the last 5 years, and how they're becoming a lot more sophisticated in their techniques to commit their criminal activities. And then we're going to end on some future perspectives, taking a 5-year view. Is that okay, Jackie?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And in fact, actually, it's quite encouraging and concerning at the same time, listening to that. The encouraging piece is, here at ACI, obviously, we serve a lot of merchants, and we've seen over the last 5 years very similar percentage growth as your predictions, and actually then in turn the reality, but as it relates to e-commerce in general. So the encouraging thing is, our merchants are experiencing exactly what you predicted and what the market has then evidenced over the last 5 years, and that's well in excess of the single double digits, if you like, the teens, so in the 20s and the 30% in growth. Obviously, those percentages vary depending on the publications you read, but certainly within our own merchants that we serve, we've seen, in the 20s growth in the recent past, in the last year, bar just a few of our, a small handful of our established merchants. But even in those merchants, we saw growth, albeit in single figures. And just to bring out, actually, in 2 of our merchants, we saw triple-digit growth. And that's just phenomenal. And it just really stands for me as evidence that it's the right time to be doing business in the online space. The concern comes is because it's so obvious an area of growth, and it's very much driven by the consumer, so individuals, everybody on the street is driving this growth. It becomes the continued attention of fraudsters and criminals. And we all know that as we deliver on public demand, so our demand for speed, for variety, for immediacy, for simplicity, and even geography, we absolutely expect to be able to order from any merchant, wherever that merchant is in the world. Then we're opening ourselves up to the ever-increasing determination of the criminals to intercept the payment flow or insert themselves into the process and steal from us. The fact that we're all seeing such enormous growth means, almost by definition, that we, the merchants, are also seeing an ever-increasing number of first-time customers, new customers shopping with us every single day. Because we as merchants see this growth in the market and we want to be part of that. and we want to have aspirations of being in the front running of that growth and grabbing market share. But that does mean we have to expect a huge amount of brand new customers coming across our doors. So can you imagine, by putting in too stringent a fraud strategy, that you lose those new customers before they've even bought anything from you? If a new customer's transactions decline because it looks high risk, and part of that risk assessment is that you've never seen this customer before, or if they abandon their purchase because of extra security measures that's creating friction in that buying process, then that customer's unlikely either to complete with the purchase with you or ever come back if they do.
And Jackie, one thing that we're finding that some merchants are in some ways distracted by the growth, this sales growth, particularly in the online channel. And do you think, from your experience, that merchants have not paid enough attention or enough importance on fraud prevention?
I think there's this ever increasing balancing act, and when it comes to managing the expectation of the merchant itself and its marketing teams and its sales teams, at the end of the day, their first and foremost goal is to sell more stuff. And if the channel of the moment and of demand is the e-commerce channel, they're going to put all of their eggs, in that basket to try and push for growth from that angle and take advantage of this trend. I think the balancing act comes with the risk fraud managers needing to understand how to balance the risk of a brand new customer with the merchant's need and desire for growth. And I think that's why it's becoming more prevalent in terms of understanding how they can get their hands on additional information that's going to give them comfort when dealing with brand new customers.
Thanks, Jackie. And I should have said to the audience that if you've got Q&A questions, please do submit them through the WebEx tool. So,
thank you. And then we will address your questions as we see them coming in towards the end. So let's reimagine this buying scenario. And you can see what if a brand new customer is coming across your threshold that you've never seen before, but you had the insight or you had the ability to see that same customer has ordered from other merchants multiple times, have had good history with those other merchants, all their data matches up, so the card or the payment method of choice has travelled in the same transaction information as the email address, the telephone number, the name, and maybe the delivery address, and it's never been associated with a fraud before, then you'd probably accept that order in a flash, and you'd accept that order not just in a flash but with confidence. And that's where positive profiling comes in. So this scenario is exactly where positive profiling can serve both a great customer experience and fraud prevention capabilities that does put the merchant in prime position for growth. Powered by Consortium intelligence and big data analytical technology, and we'll cover that as we go through this session, positive profiling can help merchants to successfully sort the good customers from the bad, and that's really what we're trying to achieve here. By building comprehensive customer profiles based on detailed behavioural data from multiple merchants, thousands of merchants globally, plus externally confirmed fraud intelligence, merchants can start to screen the customer or the shopper rather than just the transaction that you're looking at that moment in time. And ultimately, by producing more accurate results, positive profiling can empower merchants to tailor the customer experience and at the end of the day do what we all are striving to achieve in the e-commerce space, and that's improve conversion rates, maximise revenue while blocking fraud in the process. And since introducing the ability to create profile calculations, and the way we do this is to look at the consortium data we've always had here at ACI, but new technology, and we'll touch on that in a moment, has allowed us to use that same transaction information in a much more informative, much more intelligent way. And it's enabled us to create calculations that would ordinarily be calculated as we're trying to assess a transaction in real time using historical data. But instead, now, we're able to create those same calculations and store the results of those calculations in our consortium data, ready for retrieval as a transaction comes through our doors and into our analytical tool. And our customers have actually seen some pretty amazing upticks in their fraud performance and rule strategy accuracy. And we can go through some of those success stories.
I was going to say, Jackie, have you got some examples?
Yes, just as it happens, we have. I've got 3 slides of customer results, and I'm not going to go through each and every one on these 3 slides, but you will get access to this deck afterwards. But I will highlight a couple of them on each of the slides, or 1 or 2 across these next 3 slides. And this is really where we've been able to utilise the data in a more intelligent way, conduct those calculations for retrieval, and I'll explain that a little bit more a bit later in the session. But the actual physical and financial results to the bottom line have been real. And I'll go through some of these examples. These are actual examples. So the top one here, $100,000 worth of additional accepted transactions was the result of applying the new positive profiling capability in this particular merchant. By doing this through the peak season, it would have actually reduced the decline rate for this merchant by almost 60%, and financially that meant an additional $100,000 worth of accepted transactions every month. And when I talk about the peak season for this particular merchant, I'm talking November, December, January. That's true financial benefit to the bottom line for the merchant. The second example on this slide is very similar. By applying the positive profiling capability just to its top 5 rules, we were able to reduce the decline rate for this merchant by almost 50%. And that resulted in, again, a huge financial benefit to the bottom line for this merchant.
So, Jackie, it's always been viewed by a lot of merchants that the fraud prevention team is often seen as the cost centre. So what you're saying is that actually they could become a profit centre. They're actually influencing the sales of the merchants.
In fact, it's from a multiple set of perspectives. Not only financially are they able to prove that utilising a solution enables them to use the data they have and utilise information around profiling by using consortium data that maybe they can tap into, they can add true value to the bottom line in terms of real dollar savings or additional dollars in revenue. But on top of that, they're able to prove that they can increase the confidence of the business as they strive to expand, whether it be via geographically or in other means. I'll pick one example on this page, and the one probably that stands out for most people is the one at the bottom. A £2 million plus additional transaction value for this particular merchant was achieved, and I talked a little bit about the confidence, just purely because we were able to increase the confidence in the use of their fraud strategies or the application of their fraud strategies. This particular merchant is very risk averse, very unlikely to ever decline a transaction right out of the gate. Instead, they'd much rather anything that looked anything other than extremely viable by way of a transaction, they would look at manually. So there was a huge percentage of transactions that would go into their manual review queue. By increasing the confidence of the results of the solution, we were able to actually reduce the number of transactions that wasn't accepted right out of the gate, and instead turn them into straight accept. And that reduced the number of transactions hitting their manual review queues by almost 4,500. And knowing the percentage of transactions that generally hit this merchant's review queue, we know for sure that we reduced the number of declined transactions by over 3,000. And that financially equated to over £2 million.
So I guess this is an example of not only increasing sales, but also reducing costs, because manual reviews are very costly for business.
Huge savings from an administration perspective for this particular merchant. And then I'll cover one more. And positive profiling doesn't necessarily have to just simply result in a much higher amount of transactions being accepted straight out of the gate, or a more accurate assessment of fraud, but it could enable you as a fraud team to maybe understand the nature of your traffic and your business, and maybe take a look at the data in a very different way. And I'll show the example on the bottom here. We were able to ascertain, using the global card spend profile, that this particular merchant's bona fide traffic, if you like, good customers, were spending anything up to $200. What they found was, in the 12% of those, of the remainder, i.e. those spending more than $200, 40% of those turned out to be fraudulent transactions. And that made them take a step back and look at the way they were actually applying fraud strategies across their business, and make better use of, I guess, positive attention to those customers that were most likely to be good customers.
So what you're saying here, Jackie, is that you're using the data, you're effectively slicing and dicing and segmenting the data in different ways to be able to make better decisions on the transactions that are coming through the system.
Absolutely correct. And actually, I will touch very quickly on the top one on this slide, because it sort of highlights that. The use of positive profiling actually for this particular merchant allowed us to understand that 25%, 1 in 4 of this client's volume, was proved to be safe. And they were able to then remove those customers from velocity rules and actually treat them almost as VIPs. And you could do that just by understanding the data better. And so actually you could apply business encouraging strategies within your fraud prevention strategy, and that's pretty unique. But accuracy is one thing. There are other elements that you need to take into account when you consider how you manage your fraud exposure with a technical solution, especially in light of the fact we're seeing such huge growth, and we've got huge aspirations for growth. Remember those 2 merchants that we saw at ACI with triple-digit growth? That's really where you want to be. So you need to be sure that the solution you use is not something that's going to slow you down or slow down your growth aspirations. So as we all look for that magical double-digit, hopefully triple-digit growth year on year, as we continue to promise quicker and more convenient fulfillment options for our customers, any solution you use to analyse your transactions in real time must be one that can cope with growth predictions and not slow down your customers' buying experience online. And here at ACI, the way we've tackled this is to move our solutions to a brand new technical architecture that enables us to use the data we've already had, but more intelligently. So the new technical structure allows us to calculate features on the fly, and I've talked about calculate those features, or complex fraud spotting calculations that are used probably by every fraud management team in the country, in the world. But to use those calculators, pre-calculate the results of those and have them stored in our data environment and keep them up to date with each and every transaction that comes and hits that calculation or calls for the results of that calculation. And internally we call this stream analytics. And it's different than trying to calculate a feature or a complex transaction by looking at historic information as and when each transaction comes in. So it's a subtle difference, but it gives us 2 important things. First, we can get the feature value very fast, even for complex features, and we can provide many more features and more complex features in the same amount of time. And these two characteristics enables us to have more information on which to base our rules and ultimately our models on. And actually, the case in point, before this stream analytics capability, to maintain real-time decisioning, most systems would typically support a relatively low number of complex rules, and sometimes those complex rules would have had to have been disabled as spikes in volumes occur, such as peak processing periods, because they could cause performance issues, and I think we've all suffered from that in the past. And certainly with the growth we've seen and the continued prediction of growth or for growth and our aspirations for triple-digit growth, let's all aim for the stars here, we must plan for the spikes. We must plan for the spikes in volume as if they are our business as usual. So we had to change. We as a supplier of solutions had to change to accommodate this need. So with the stream analytics capability, we now have tens or even hundreds of profiles across an enormous range of data points and timeframes, and that ability puts more information in our hands so we can make more accurate decisions and make them really quickly.
So Jackie, what you're saying is the tool, the stream analytics engine is really, it's like almost like positive feedback. You're giving it more data and you get more out of it. Is that a safe summary?
It is. It is. It absolutely is. It's the more intelligence you can put in the hands of our stream analytics capability, the more it can be taken into account. What this new architecture brings to the table is the fact that we can actually incorporate all of the data elements that we're seeing with every transaction that comes across the threshold of Redshield. And the more data we bring in and we can create known and complex calculations, the more accuracy we bring to our merchants. The last thing this architecture brings to the table is scalability. So all of the components of the stream analytics engine scale horizontally, and I guess that's where I'm coming finally to the point where we called it a stream, because it's going in that direction. And actually it gets faster the wider we scale, so it's a win-win all round. So that leads us nicely into what is this repository in which all of this data sits. And it's really, it allows us to use the data shared by our merchants in this community in a more sophisticated way. And it allows us to pool the original transaction information augmented by internal calculations that ACI apply to the transaction, perhaps also augmented by other data, intelligence gleaned from external sources, maybe gleaned by additional information supplied by the merchant itself. Some of that augmentation will happen in real time, other may be added to the transaction in near real time, really depends on the source. But ultimately, all of this information and the intelligence residing in the resulting data lake is for use in those complex feature calculations that I described earlier. Producing ever-increasing accuracy in our rule strategy.
So I'm right in thinking that your data lake is not only the data that you have for your own transactions and your merchants' transactions, but also third parties, so sources from third parties. So
absolutely.
Like device identification or fingerprinting, those type of things.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So the architecture itself lends itself to be able to pull in a much wider set of external data sources. So it's not limited even to structured data, but can be including reaching out to third parties like social media, for example, anything that's going to allow you to augment the transaction, round off your assumptions and round off your assessment of that shopper, and be included in analysis of that transaction in the moment in time. It also, the data lake itself can also be the repository for other data sources, such as your own payment data. So you can include your authentication information, your settlement information, refund information, dispute information, maybe from calls into your call center, telephone information records, and perhaps even other more elusive data sources like information around what the issuer contains or has to hand relating to the shopper, should we ever get to a point of agreement amongst the parties to make that happen. And perhaps other information that you have that's relevant to how you would treat a shopper, so such as your own loyalty program information and records, or your own VIP list, or anything. So essentially, the more relevant data you can get into the data lake, the more accurate our real-time decisioning will be for all parties in that payment chain.
So it sounds like more in, more out. More in, more out.
And more in, definitely more accurately out. I'm going to show you the next slide is going to give you a little bit of an insight into consortium data, where it sits in an overarching, complete fraud strategy. One of the things that at ACI we're very, very passionate about is ensuring that there are multiple layers of control when it comes to managing fraud risk. And as you can see on this picture, we sort of struggled to figure out the best way to communicate this. But consortium data, as powerful as it is, and as profitable as it can be turned into, still only forms a part of an overall fraud strategy application. And as you can see here, there are multiple layers that you need to ensure are present when you're managing fraud in an effective way. And you can see this is a picture of the results across the users of the ACI solution set. And you can see that actually artificial intelligence or machine learning forms the biggest piece of successful fraud detection capability. But then, coming into second place and third place quite easily is the ability to write rules on the fly. So you've got your velocity, you've got your pattern detection, and consortium forms just over 10% of the results. So I guess what I'm trying to show with this slide here is there's a multiple layer of activity and strategy that you need to apply to get the best and very well-rounded results from a fraud prevention detection shop within a merchant, even right down to reaching out to third parties. So again, you can see here device ID is 10%, IP geolocation information and address verification services all form part of a successful fraud strategy.
And this question I had on the pie chart is that the percentages are not necessarily a particular merchant or even a group of merchants, but these percentages are going to change in different circumstances. So yes, one particular merchant or an airline would have a different set of profile than, say, a grocery retailer.
Yes, absolutely. But this particular picture is an overarching picture of the solution we offer. Okay, so I think that leads us nicely into talking a little bit about the third-party data that we feed into our data lake. So feeding the data lake is one thing, but practically speaking, we as merchants, or actually we as supplier of services to merchants, are continuously assessing partners who own data or analyze data, have analytical data capability, that will add value to our decisioning process. So carefully chosen third parties can provide elements that are not present in your fraud solution. And by integrating to third parties who are best in class in their chosen discipline adds to the capabilities of the fraud solution by rounding off its capabilities across all manner of needs. So for example, your fraud solution may not specialize in understanding the reputation of device, as Mark talked about earlier. So you would partner up with a third party that does. And it will just give you that better understanding of the risk associated with that transaction. Our approach actually to third parties is simple. We listen to the market and the directions that fraud is taking. We listen to our customers and their desires and their needs. Perhaps those customers are already using a third party and they feel it would be better if it was technically integrated into their chosen fraud tool. Or our own 5-year development plan may actually take us in a different direction, unexpected by our customers, but actually ultimately because that's the direction we feel that the market needs our solution to take. So whoever we choose, we keep in mind that our merchants are global, or our merchants are anywhere, somewhere in the world. So there's a number of characteristics each of those third parties need to satisfy, but essentially we are totally agnostic when it comes to selecting third parties. It just needs to provide us with what we feel the market is telling us we need to provide, or our merchants are asking for, or our 5-year plan dictates.
So it sounds like, Jackie, that there's no particular third party you wouldn't work with. It has to be right for the merchant, it has to be right for the global set, and the value of the data lake appropriately. You know, so
absolutely.
Yeah.
And in fact, in the past, we've actually been quite restricted to response times, for example. But the new architecture allows us to bring in data that doesn't necessarily have to be applied at that millisecond in time. So actually, it's widened our horizons. But a good example of this would be a need for our airlines industry, where it's standard for that airlines industry to actually dip into and feed into a global shared fraud database specifically designed for the airline industry, and that's called Perseus.
And that's the example on the slide.
That's the example on the slide. As we look at our solutions and we look to shape our solutions over the next 5 years, we continue to explore and research emerging issues. And there's that age-old struggle of staying one step ahead of the fraudster, and that's been a challenge for all providers of fraud solutions, not just us. Because actually when you look at what the aim of the fraudster really is, it's to continuously predict the industry's next move, work hard to circumvent those controls that get put in place, or predictive measures in order to continue their criminal ways. And actually, the fraudster practices deception. And I've looked at synonyms of that word, deception, and things that pop up are things like cheating, trickery, underhandedness, duping, bluffing, treachery. Wonderful word. And that's hard to predict. That's very hard to predict, because it literally is doing everything in its power to go around all of that. So one thing we do well at ACI, and one thing we always preach, is don't put all your eggs in one apparent silver-lined basket, because any single line of defence can be attacked by these bluffing, treacherous, duping individuals. So we always say there's no silver bullet. So putting your bets on the latest trends that purport to provide that is a risky move. So one example of this is the trend for protecting yourself with artificial intelligence. Standalone. It's a trend. Of course, we at ACI have known for years and have included in our fraud strategy and our fraud solution for years machine learning, artificial intelligence. But we've never purported that's the silver bullet, and we will never purport that to be. So especially in the world of growth, especially in the world of speed and need, this explosion in e-commerce, artificial intelligence, machine learning is a must. In fact, it's a given. You really can't cope with the volumes of growth in this space without it. But it must form part of a multi-layered approach to managing fraud. And actually, as you can see here on this slide, we're going through multiple layers. And right at the top is the machine learning. Positive profiling, that the topic of this webinar today, forms a huge element of that. Using intelligently consortium data, but always being able to drop out and into the world of rules. Actually, machine learning is all about the application in conjunction with rules. But being able to make decisions on the fly, adjustments on the fly, you have to have that in your armory. And being able to see what's happening with your data, not just in that real-time moment, but all of the time. So having access at your fingertips to all of the data within that data lake as it relates to you and your business, and I have been able to produce reports on the fly using business intelligence, plus the expert help of risk analysts.
So, Jackie, I think when we were speaking just before the webinar, you described a new type of fraudster. They're becoming more sophisticated, and almost in some ways they are hiring data scientists to pitch against your data scientists. Is that something that you've found? And what's the concern around that?
Well, that kind of activity did come to the attention of, I guess, the data scientist fraternity and the fraud prevention world in around 2013, 2014, where it became known that there are data scientists out there on the wrong side of the law that are working hard to produce models of their own that are designed to confuse and therefore reduce the performance capabilities of machine learning models. So it's that kind of understanding and research that needs to be continued when planning a 5-year strategy on providing solutions for the market. And that's really another reason why multiple layers of control are so important. If you have put all your eggs in one basket, for example, and that becomes the focus of attention from fraud behaviour, then you best have a very quick get-out clause or additional strategy to help you succeed.
And best not to rely on just one layer.
Agreed. Yeah, and we preach by that at ACI. So let's go for the future. So what are we preparing for in terms of providing solution sets for those in need of fraud prevention detection capabilities? There's always been this continued conflict is not the right word, maybe too strong a word, but discussion around what the merchant community is doing to prevent fraud and what the banking community is doing to prevent fraud. And we know that this discussion exists because one of the most prevalent words that exists in this discipline is liability, i.e. who's to blame, and therefore who should take the loss, who carries the can. All the time that is the first question, there will always be a them and us scenario. And wouldn't it be great if we could all work together to really find a way to stop fraudulent behaviour happening in the first place? One step in the right direction has to be the pooling of intelligence and information that will enable the most accurate decision to be made in real time as the transaction's happening. So whether you're a merchant, a bank, an intermediary, an acquirer, we've talked a lot about the new architecture on which RedShield sits. We've actually at ACI done the same with our issuing solution, PRM. i.e. we've moved it to the same architecture. And that means, within that architecture, we've talked a lot about the data lake. So that means we've actually made it possible, of course, when all players are comfortable with the concept, to move the fraud intelligence and data together in a single data lake. So whether you're a merchant, a bank, an intermediary, or acquirer, you have the luxury of the power of the data lake and shared intelligence across the entire payment chain. So, in summary, in the ever-moving world of fraud, especially when coupled with a world that's so attracted to the fraudster, and we know it's attracted to the fraudster because one thing we actually haven't touched on is the fact as much as we're seeing growth in the e-commerce sector, we're actually seeing an increased growth in the attempted frauds by fraudster community. So it's attractive to the fraudster. We all have to be prepared and think about our next move. So failing to prepare for growth is preparing to fail. So the opportunity to identify customers as well as fraudsters can be invaluable for online merchants, especially as we embrace the consumer's insatiable appetite for all things e-commerce and we see our volumes explode. So we're all faced with the same nice-to-have problems. Fulfillment pace is faster, volumes are sky high, So the revenue opportunities are there. So if you don't prepare, those revenues are what's most at risk from poor planning. So positive profiling can help significantly with this identification process, supporting increased conversions through reduced friction and higher acceptance rates, as well as reduced fraud and chargebacks through highly accurate fraud decisioning. Now, this speed also means that we have to have a solution that's robust. It's not going to fall over or slow you down. And of course, it's important that positive profiling forms just one part of a layered approach. So working in sync with a full range of intelligence-driven tools and strategies will ensure you can succeed and reap the benefits of growing faster than your competitors.
So Jackie, just conscious of time, we've slightly run over. I know quite a few people have asked questions. I want to sort of touch on a couple of those. Something that retailers constantly ask about is the return on investment. You know, as they put in more fraud prevention tools and potentially use your multi-layered approach, does ACI work with those merchants to help them understand the return on investment? I know you've got a couple of examples there where there's some obvious upsales or prevention of declines. You know, is that part of the activity that ACI would actually get involved in?
With every new user of the fraud solutions that we provide, our expert risk analysts will work with that merchant to understand a few things, one of which is fraud appetite. So every merchant will have one, something that's acceptable to them in terms of fraud losses. In terms of working with them to understand those thresholds, understanding the vertical in which that merchant sits and knowing what the global acceptance levels for chargebacks, for example, for straight out of the gate accept levels percentage-wise. We will work with them to see how large their manual review queues are, manual review teams are, and we will work to set those key performance indicators. Our task with that merchant throughout the life cycle of their contract with us will be to ensure we at least keep them to those key performance indicators or improve on them.
So it sounds very hands-on. Another question we had was around GDPR, and they're obviously protecting consumer data. I'm assuming it's entirely tokenized. It's not something that you can attribute any particular data item to an individual.
Absolutely. We've worked hard to ensure that our solutions are compatible with the regulations that come out, and absolutely GDPR is one of those. We work closely with our merchants to ensure the messaging to their customers is one that is going to satisfy GDPR expectations. So yes, it's something we work hard on.
Okay, so rapidly running out of time now, but one more question I'm very keen to understand. Do you, as a fraud prevention specialist, do you look at particular verticals, and does the solution support those different verticals? You know, say whether it's gaming or whether it's airlines or general retail or digital goods. How do you deal with that?
One thing we've done over the course of designing our solution set is to ensure its flexibility. So there's a couple of things to talk about when you talk about verticals. So one is, can the solution fit a particular vertical? Has it got the ability to be able to understand the differences in vertical 1 versus vertical 2 and have the ability to write the strongest strategy for both, rather than having to settle for the strongest strategy and then one size fits all? We made it very clear from our design concept period from many years ago that we have to make sure the flexibility is there so that there is strength in all verticals, however different they are, and make sure that we can write strategies that will fit an individual vertical. But the power that the new architecture brings us is enabling us and our merchants to utilise that consortium data, now the data lake, in a much more intelligent way. So actually, if they wanted to write profiles at an individual merchant level, they can. If they want to write profiles so so that they can understand the behaviour of their shopper globally, no matter what vertical they've shopped in, or if they want to understand the patterns of behaviour of individuals in a vertical, they can do that.
Okay, Jackie, that's always a great pleasure talking to you about fraud prevention and the assets that you are obviously managing. I really appreciate your time, and thank you very much to the audience for your questions. I'm sorry we've run out of time. I would appreciate if you, as you log off the webinar, there will be a quick survey that you can really appreciate your feedback on the WebEx tool. But we're coming to an end, and thank you very much, Jackie.
Thank you.